Okay, well, I'm Kent Schmitz. I work for the diocese in the youth ministry and adolescent catechesis office. And thank you for joining in on our last of 9 of our regional ministry gatherings. Today's session is Beyond Door Knocking and Bulletin Announcements. How are we sharing the gospel with those inside and outside our parishes? And we have Dr. Danielle Zsupan Jerome with us today. And so with that, let us begin with our opening prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Gathered together in Christ we begin. Lord, help us to see you in the lives of those closest to us, in the strangers we encounter along the way, and in ourselves. Lord, may we be nourished by your word and your spirit. Help us to rejoice in your presence and grow in love of other and in love of you, as we see you at work in ourselves, our families, our co-workers, and all those around us. May we be sent as disciples, acting as your hands and feet for all your children. Lord, remind us to love all people. In your name we pray, amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, the Holy Spirit. And so I would like to welcome you all again and to introduce our presenter. Dr. Daniella Zsupan Jerome is the Director of Ministerial Formation and Field Education at St. John's University School of Theology and Seminary in Collegeville, Minnesota. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Theology from the University of Notre Dame, a Master of Arts in Liturgical Studies from St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota, a Master of Arts in Religion and the Arts from Yale Divinity School, and a Doctor of Philosophy and Theology and Education from Boston College. And so we welcome Dr. Daniella Zsupan Jerome to present. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. I appreciate that kind introduction. Kent, I'm delighted to be with you all. It's not clear to me at this point, should I go ahead and proceed, or were there other announcements before this by Julie? I'll give that a pause to clarify that. But if there's nothing else, I can get going if you'd like.
Go ahead.
All right. So I'm gonna just put up my screen, if you'll bear with me for a second. And let's begin. So thank you again for this kind invitation. I'm back at St. John's after about 20 years in this new role. I was a student here, so I'm delighted to be back in the area. And those of you also who are in the area and not joining us from another part of the country, I hope we cross paths sometimes and see how what we do here at St. John's can be of service to your ministry. And so today I was invited to talk about this topic about beyond knocking doors and bulletin announcements. How do we engage in communication and share the gospel with those inside and outside the parish? And as I thought about this, it's really, to me, about how we understand what communication is, not just as this sort of practical human interaction that we have every day, but rather an expression of faith, an expression of theology, an expression of how we embody the gospel. So I want to, put some ideas out about that. I like this topic very much, and I hope that you do too. And then I'm happy to, be part of the conversation with you in any way that's helpful here or beyond, if you want to contact me. So, like I said, this topic is close to my heart. And in this particular way of thinking about it, I was prompted by this article that I came across a few years ago now. And you could see the link there if you want to look it up. It was called Hello Church, Anybody Home? And it was a really brief piece about how do churches that this author kind of surveyed handle inquiries and contacts. How do they answer the phone? How do they respond to emails? How well are our communities of faith doing with that? And the article said not so well, unfortunately, that they were saying that there's kind of a basic failure in communication from what they've perceived when they looked into this. Said, for example, most calls or emails sent to a parish don't really establish successful communication in this author's experience, that messages are not always returned in a timely manner, or there's an answering machine, which is, that's a useful thing, answering machine. But if, somebody doesn't pick up, that could be a hindrance. Sometimes if the phone call or message is returned, that it could be that the response is rather brisk or leads with rules and regulations. Well, have you turned in this form? Have you been donating regularly? These kinds of responses. Website information, similar, kind of laying out the rules and regulations, which are, again, are helpful things, but it's like they're leading with that. And is that helpful? That's what the article was wondering about. And so that, as according to this article, it kind of gives this impression for people that there's an extra hurdle to get across when one wants to get in contact with a community of faith. And so this article was saying that people often go elsewhere where the waters are a bit more friendly, just based on the lack of effective communication on the front end. So I saw this and I thought about it, and maybe this resonates with your experience, maybe it doesn't, I don't know. But to me, this gave me food for thought to, compose a conversation like this that we're having today, in terms of how do we engage in communication on the most basic level with each other and with the people who seek into our communities of faith. And how do we do that in a way that expresses who we are as people of the gospel, as people who are members of Christ? And I wonder if this resonates with you. I don't know if it does. Maybe in the Q&A, you can bring up some information about this as well. But I wondered why this is. Like, if this is the case, that on the front end, we don't really handle church communication too well, why might that be? Like, surely there must be a reason behind it. So the first idea that came to mind is, on the most obvious level, good communication takes time. It takes time to slow down enough to pause and really hear what a person's saying, and really kind of listen to what they're asking for, to express for them a modicum of hospitality and a bit of joy that they came across the store's threshold this day, or picked up the phone or sent us a message, to be joyful about that. All of that takes a bit of time to kind of pause and step back, and to be able to come from that place. And I think very many of us are, this is just like a symptom of our life today. We're so overwhelmed and busy and handling things all the time that sometimes it's difficult to kind of pause and be human in that sense, rather than just keep taking things off the list. I wonder if busyness contributes, is another word. So I know maybe you have thoughts on that as well. But I do feel like that's part of our culture today, just to kind of be responding so quickly that we don't pause and consider like the human aspect of that communication. As I think about this is my bottom line. If you take one thing away today, this is it. Communication really matters in ministry, and especially in ministry. It's part and parcel of it. When we're ministering, and many of you who are in ministry know this well, we're always relating with other people. And in our relationships with other people, we're expressing something beyond ourselves. We're expressing the joy of Jesus Christ and his good news, and our life transformed by that, even if it's just a brief interaction. So we're always relating and engaging with others. And so we can't really localize ministry into like, the big events. It's not just something that happens at Mass. It's not just something that happens on the retreat. It's not just something that happens in the context of pastoral visits or service work or like the youth group. Ministry is kind of happening all the time when we're interacting with others and engaging with others, as representatives of our tradition and as people who are called to share the gospel. All of us in the church who are contributing in different ways are engaging in ministry in ways big and small, not just at the big events, right, is what I'm saying. And as you know, this comes out of your baptism. If you're ordained, it comes out all the more from your ordination. But it's called for each of us to take part of sharing that good news of Jesus Christ, sharing that good news of Jesus Christ. Like, we're fundamentally all called to that. And that in itself is an act of communication, to go and tell, to go and proclaim. We're all called to be communicators. Like, how well are we doing with that? And not just in formal settings, but in day-to-day interactions as well. So this means to me that whenever we're filling our day with anything that comes across our desk, or however it is that your work is situated, it is always an opportunity to share the good news of Jesus Christ, to communicate the faith well. And so how we handle this basic interaction we call communication is an essential part of that, a real essential part of that. So just some further thoughts on that. So I went ahead and looked up the word communication and how do we define this essential human act? And as most of you would guess, something like this: the process or act of using words, signs, symbols, behaviors to express information or ideas, thoughts, and feelings, etc. So this is what our culture thinks communication is. But I would propose to you that when we think about communication from the perspective of our faith, we're not just talking about sharing information. We're talking about something much more relational and fundamentally human than that, and also deeply divine. So this is a quote I pulled out from a document that I really like called Communia Progressio. This is a church document from the 1970s that talks about communication, if anyone's interested in this topic. Anyway, this is a particular quote I wanted to share with you. It says here, in addition to this idea of exchanging information, this says more. Communication is more than just the expression of ideas and the indication of emotion. At its most profound level, it is the giving of self in love, a gift of self in love. So to me, that's quite beautiful and also humbling. Like, do I always think of myself as giving myself in an act of love when I'm texting or shooting off an email or answering that phone or whatever? But yet the tradition is calling us to see it this way. We're not just exchanging information. We're sharing of ourselves to another in a loving way. So how can that kind of reframe our practices? So going back to this idea of communication and how it matters in ministry, if communication is a gift of self and love, we can see how this really closely begins to resonate with ministry and how we serve in the name of the church, in the name of Jesus Christ. Our communication as a gift of self and love is already de facto doing a form of ministry. And if it's bad communication, then it's maybe undoing what ministry should be doing, right? So how we communicate truly does speak volumes and already begins to tell the good news of Jesus Christ in gesture and in listening and in hospitality and in presence and in the sense that we are there to encounter another person. I like the way Pope Francis does this. I pulled a couple of images of him up because I think he does this really well, and he's really aware of the way that he communicates really speaks volumes. So there's all these beautiful photos. We can capture him, and when he embraces people who have various struggles, or is approachable and kind to young people, is seeking to build bridges across traditions with embrace, a hug, a smile. So, for somebody who sees this image but doesn't proceed to read the rest of the story, which very often we scroll like that, already this image is communicating something profound about the Catholic Church, our tradition, the gospel, Jesus Christ, all that Pope Francis represents. So I think, these are some good examples to show the deep value of being mindful of our communication, how we come across to people, and what that says to the world, not just about us, but the tradition that we represent. Communication, as I said, it's also something that's deeply and profoundly human. Like, we should take this seriously as people made in the image and likeness of God, a part of our human dignity and our identity. I like this beautiful quotation that speaks to that. If you don't know, every year there's a World Communications Day message that comes out from the church, from the desk of Pope Francis, actually, on some theme of communication. I like to follow these. So if this is interesting to you, maybe something to look into as well. But a few years ago, it was about communication in the family and how we communicate with each other, parents and spouses and children and siblings, is deeply expressive of God's love and our calling as Christians. So anyway, in the context of that beautiful message, there was this quote that tells us about how profoundly human this act of communication is, and that it actually begins in the womb. And how beautiful is that? That the womb, which hosts for us the first school of communication, is a place of listening and physical contact where we first begin to familiarize ourselves with the outside world within a protected environment, with the reassuring sound of the mother's heartbeat. This encounter between two persons, so intimately related while still distinct from each other, is an encounter full of promise, is our first experience of communication. It's an experience which we all share since each of us was born of a mother, end quote. And I love that. I love that this also sets communication on a plane that's not just an exchange of information that we could digitize, right? But rather it's this profound, beautiful mutuality that exists in a very corporeal, intimate way, already from the experience of motherhood, the experience of being in someone else's belly and being born. So much part of who we are in the most profound level as human beings. And for us to really honor that as disciples and as ministers, I think is really important. So profoundly human, but also, like I said earlier, deeply theological. So communication doesn't just tell us something about who we are, but also about who God is. This is another quotation from that same document, Communio et Progressio. And it tells us to think about communication really in light of who God is in the Holy Trinity. It says here, in the Christian faith, the unity and brotherhood of all man are the chief aims of all communication. And these find their source and model in the central mystery of the eternal communion between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, who live in a single divine life. So our ultimate idea for what communication is and what it should be really comes from the mystery of the Holy Trinity itself. I'm going to unpack that just a little bit. So it gives us some more to think about. And we could really think about a theology of communication, believe it or not. I think about that a lot. I hope you might think about it someday too, if this is the field that you're in. But going back to this idea of the Holy Trinity first, and the mystery of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, the three persons of the Holy Trinity existing sort of this eternal communion with each other. And, you know, if I can use kind of like very everyday language, like what are they up to? What are they doing? You know, that's an approximation of language, but just the way, like, what are these persons doing in the Trinity? Well, what they're up to, if you will, and that's an incomplete way of describing it, is they're in this mutual act with each other of self-gift and love and sharing and giving of themselves totally and receiving the other totally and kind of pouring themselves out into each other in this beautiful act of complete love. This is the heart of God. And it's also sort of the most perfect ideal we have for what communication should mean. That idea of gift of self and love poured out into another and receiving another, and the mutuality and sharing and love that comes out of that exists in its perfection in the Holy Trinity. And it is so abundant that at one point in salvation history, it pours out into our reality in what we call revelation. And revelation, of course, gets perfected for us in the incarnation of the Word, Jesus Christ himself. And all of that is also like a way of communication. God communicates himself most fully for us in the incarnation of Jesus Christ, the incarnate Word. That's a communicative act too, God telling us who he is in the most complete way, in the Word made flesh. And of course, that continues through the work of the Holy Spirit, in the experience of Christ that also ascends in the life of the church, because it's the Spirit, since Pentecost, is the one who gives us the ability to speak, the one who reminds us of the Word, Jesus who walked with us, and then gives us the ability to speak and the gift of the breath to go and proclaim that, as it happened at Pentecost, and it continues to happen in our particular callings and vocation. So that it's a beautiful theology to the Holy Spirit featuring as part of our communication. And of course, then you have the church which continues to exist in order to evangelize, in order to communicate the good news of Jesus Christ, that is salvation, and that is new life, that is possibility and hope and eternal life for all. So all of that could be seen through a thread of communication, which I think is very interesting. You know, we always kind of think of these mysteries separately through catechesis, but I'm saying all of this is about communication, and all of this should actually shape how we communicate in everyday ways with each other, if this is the standard for this, from understanding who God is. So how we communicate is really founded on all of this and what this reveals to us. And how we communicate, in other words, already does theology, and it already does ministry before we get to like the particular event or task or whatever that we're doing. It already speaks about our faith in God, our identity as Catholics and as Christians, and about the community we call the church. And it can already begin to serve and engage people in a real, authentic way. So that was my theology. Let's talk about practice and experience a little bit. And as I was thinking about this, I came across some of these are operative models of communication that we might have, in various settings where we find ourselves. And this is, going back to this article, how is it that we address inquiries? And this might be some of the models that we've come across and experienced ourselves, maybe have been guilty of sometimes. I know I struggled with these myself. But one of them here would be a palace guard. That's one metaphor I came up with. And this metaphor of communication would be like leaning heavily on pomp and circumstance and kind of ritual and proper order for things, and not as much on actually encountering a person and like what their needs are. So it's like, have you followed the proper form? Are you addressing me by the proper title? That sort of thing, kind of coming across with that more so than, hey, how can I help you? Glad to have you here. Another metaphor I came up with is the bouncer. And this is kind of giving off the attitude of is whether somebody is good enough to enter our establishment. So, who is it? Where is it that you're coming from? What is it that you're about? Have you filled out these forms? Well, actually, that's more so another one, but kind of giving off an attitude of like, we're guarding something very special here. This is a very sacred space, which that's true, but it's almost putting on front, like, prove to me that you're worthy of entering here. And as you know, maybe from Pope Francis's theology, that's quite problematic. But that could be another kind of operative model in the way that we receive people. Another one here is more so about forms and proper regulations. And this is my border control officer metaphor, who would ask us to have the right documents. Have you filled out the proper form? Do you have these documents? Are you up to date with your electronic donations or regular donations? Kind of leading with that. And actually in working with students in ministry, I've heard that a lot, where somebody calls up a community of faith at a crisis, and the first thing that kind of gets asked is, okay, are you a member of our community, and have you been up to date with all the regular forms and these kinds of things? And that could really hurt people when they're in crisis, that's the first thing that gets asked, even if the person in the office is just trying to establish history of who this person is. So that's complex there, but are we giving off this attitude? Or are we giving off the attitude of a switchboard operator, where the de facto response is, okay, let me transfer you. Like I'm just kind of bouncing problems off to others because I'm quite busy and I can't really handle this, but somebody else can. So here you go. That's another mode of operation we can kind of look at and see if that's helpful. Another one I have is an ER nurse, who's kind of doing triage here. Now, granted, Pope Francis did propose for us the image of church as a field hospital, but it's not just a field hospital. So doing triage is sort of quick and life-saving actions. But sometimes people aren't looking for quick and life-saving. They're looking for like someone to pause and have a conversation with them and to be present and to kind of engage in their story. So are we giving off quick and life-saving, get it done? Or can we slow down to be present and like show up for a more complex interaction? And the last one I came across was kind of the absent response, the back in 5 minutes, when we're not answering phone calls, emails, where no one's at the desk when somebody comes in, that sort of thing. So I know I struggle with some of these myself. Maybe you've come across this, maybe you struggle with this as well. I kind of put this pastiche out there to see maybe this can drive this message home on an actual experiential level. And also to kind of offer us a different kind of model. This title for Christ, the perfect communicator, is not my invention. It actually comes from the language of the church. And the church is teaching on communication. Some of those documents I referenced earlier, this would be the language used in there too, talking about Christ, who, among other things, is the perfect communicator. And I found this painting to go with it. You might have seen this yourself. This artist, James Tissot, who does a lot of biblical images. And this is when Nicodemus goes to Jesus at night and Jesus engages with him. And I thought it's a really beautiful story when it comes to communication. And especially this idea of being available for people, kind of like when they need us to be available, and taking time to sit with them and talk with them and hear their story and engage with them. And I know that's sometimes impractical, I know that, but can they still at least give off the attitude of like that being a possibility, even if we don't have the time at the moment to do that? So here Jesus, as you might recall from the story of Nicodemus, he engages with him and he sits with him in this most familiar way and engages with him in a way that he can understand and feel heard. and begins to kind of convey to them a sense of hope and possibility and new life and the good news through that interaction. And I think that's really beautiful. And I think in some ways we're all called to this aspect of communication, not just those of us who are thinking about communication professionally. I know some of you among here are doing this church communication professionally, but I think all of us in ministry, and really all of us who are baptized in Christ, in the Word made flesh, are called to reflect on how Christ communicated and how was he present to people and how did he share his words in a way that we can emulate. That, for example, the fact that when he met people, he spoke in a way that they could understand. And he told stories in a way that people could pick up on and kind of unpack. He walked with the people. He was approachable in that sense. He resonated with their pain. He wept when they wept. So how can we be present in that same fashion in our particular roles? So, just keeping in mind, for example, when a person contacts us in our ministry context, it seems like there might be, more often than not, pretty vulnerable. There might be in a moment of crisis, they might need help. There might be facing a celebration, a wedding, a baptism. There might be getting ready to bury a loved one. So those are all kind of vulnerable states. They may be also aware of the formality, the de facto formality of a church setting, that this is a sacred space. And so they're kind of inquiring into that. They may be unfamiliar with institutional structures and not wanting to offend or not know how to kind of address that. But they know that they're important, it's just they're unfamiliar with it. And they may not want to misstep or offend. So there might be a lot of ambiguities and vulnerabilities involved when people are contacting a community of faith, a church. So how do we meet people where they are? How do we kind of set them at ease and see how they can find good news and joy in the context where we're inviting them to? And thinking also not just about meeting people where they are, but also what we represent. So we know that Christ was the Word made flesh, and Christ is the Son of God with us, but Christ also reveals to us the Father. And so in the same way, communication is revelatory of who God is. And in whether we like it or not, when we're communicating as representatives of our faith tradition of the church, we are revealing who God is and who Christ is. And sometimes this is a delight and a joy if that goes well, and sometimes that's a struggle. Sometimes that could bring embarrassment to us, that could drive people away if it's not done well. Sometimes we claim this, sometimes people put this on us, right? So that when a person calls, and then for whatever basic human reason that phone call doesn't go well, because let's be honest, none of us are all perfect all the time, right? And it could be that phone call doesn't go well. That at the same time, it could be that the caller puts on us all the weight of the tradition, and that poorly handled phone call will come to represent the entire institution of the church, Christianity as a whole. This is how these Christians are. They can't even talk to me nicely. So like it or not, that's a dynamic that's present. How we answer a phone, how we address an email, how we welcome a person in, may as well be Bishop doing it, may as well be Pope Francis doing it, may as well be Christ himself doing it, right? In some people's minds. Again, whether we like it or not, that kind of correlation takes place mentally for a lot of people. Sadly, in my context, I've heard a lot of stories from people who've been estranged from the church, and we kind of seek into why not. Why haven't you been back? Why don't you feel welcome? There often are like decade-long family stories that go back and say, well, my father, my somebody was treated poorly, was spoken to poorly, was not welcomed, was not received well, and so we don't feel like we need to engage with this tradition. And I wonder how much of that comes down to communication. So the point I'm making overall, whether we like it or not, we are always representing something greater than ourselves. And how can we be conscious of this as communicators of the faith? How can we speak in a way to reveal more? So I want to end with this part of the reflection, and I know you have discussion groups, with 4 ideas to keep in mind. And these are kind of 4 measures for our discernment as we think about being faithful communicators. And what are some of the things we can pull out from the tradition to help us keep on task as we strive to be better communicators of the faith according to these ideals? And so these four are the four facts that I kind of pulled out from the Gospels. Number one, that words give life, to remember that words give life. Second, to think of communication as a gift of self and love. Third, to always practice the idea of listening first. Very Benedictine, here I am at St. John's. And then fourth, how do we bear the fruits of the Spirit? So I'm going to offer a word on each of those briefly, and then I think then it'll be time to transition for a conversation. So words give life. What do I mean by that? As I think of how God uses words in Scripture, whether God, the Father himself, or Jesus' own words, it tends to be that those are life-giving words. Thinking about Father, the Creator, saying, "Let there be," at the moment of creation in Genesis, that it was actually God's words uttered in the breath of the Spirit that brought reality into being. God spoke creation into being. God spoke life into being. Isn't it amazing to think about what that means for our communication and how we handle our words? And for us to really think about how our words might give life to others. In the same way, Jesus's words, very often, he used his words to restore people to life, so that when he raised Lazarus, it was with the words, "Lazarus, come out." He uttered those, and Lazarus rose. Or Jairus's daughter, very clearly, Jesus says, "Little girl, get up." Or the widow's son at Nain, "Young man, I tell you, arise." So Jesus gives life, returns life to these people who are afflicted, who are dead, even with his words. His words give life. How can our words give life to others? The second one, as I mentioned, self-gift in love. Again, I mentioned this idea earlier, but here I recall for us the entirety of Jesus' life with us. His birth, ministry, teaching, passion, death, resurrection, all of it. How that was something that was constantly Jesus's gift of himself to us, offered in love unto death and unto new life after that through the Paschal mystery. All of it is God's loving gesture to us to call us into relationship. Jesus came so that we could be at one with the Father. So how does our communication offer love? How does it call others into relationship? How does it call others into communion? That's something else to discern. Not only how do we give life, but how do we call into relationship others through the words we speak? The third one is this idea of listening, how essential that is for good communication practices. I'm recalling here the moment of Pentecost, where those disciples are huddled in this upper room. And what are they doing? They were told to wait and pray and listen and anticipate and expect and make space within themselves for what is to come. They didn't know, but then the Spirit came and kind of gave them the words, and they went out and proclaimed. But all of that is anticipated by their posture of sitting, waiting, and listening prayerfully, so that that Spirit can come and like alight that room for them with the passion for the gospel. So as we think about the work of the Spirit and the importance of anticipating the Spirit, all of our communication of the faith today, when authentic, is empowered by that same Spirit. That if when we're endeavoring to communicate the faith authentically, it's never our own gesture, it's always the work of the Spirit through us. So how can we be in that mode of listening and anticipation and discernment of the Spirit as we endeavor to communicate the faith? How can we make that into like our spiritual space within ourselves for the Spirit to come and empower us to go and proclaim, to be in that mode, to be in that sense of openness to God's Spirit? And then if we are, this is the last one, to look for these fruits, to look for the ways that our spiritual act of communication, even when expressed in the most mundane ways, it's imbued by the Spirit. How do we know? It's marked by the fruits. It's marked by love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. These are the fruits of the Spirit from Galatians 5. You can look them up. But when our communication manifests these, we can kind of be assured we're walking in step with God's Spirit. So another discernment point, especially a good one where we're tempted to comment, whatever we're tempted to comment on the social media, like, is this kind? Is this good? Is this patient? If it's not, don't send it, don't post it. So I propose to you these four kind of as beginning points for discernment. How do we do this faithfully? With a little bit of this theology And I'm going to pause here, turn it over to the organizers. I think there's opportunity for questions as well as breakout sessions planned. So I'm going to pause here and see what's next. And thank you for your time so far.
Oh, thank you, Daniella. There's just a lot of depth and richness in your presentation, and but yet very practical and applicable in the ministries that we do. And yes, we are going to, at this point, move into some small group discussions. I think those slides will be coming up here in a second to show us what those are. I want to draw attention to, this is the last of 9 in a series of our regional ministry gatherings of one body, gathered, nourished, sent. We're preparing for our diocesan ministry day that's coming up. But all of these have been recorded and they will be available. I think that link is going in the chat right now. And so on our diocesan website that you should be able to link to if you wanted to view any of these. I think, oh wait, there it goes. There's the link. So if you want to get into the chat and make sure you can get that, it's in the YouTube playlist of our diocese. And so we've had some very wonderful presentations and discussions and some wonderful information that has been shared in these last 9 now sessions. So thanks for all who have participated in that. But if you didn't get a chance to participate in any of them, I invite you to visit these, and you have a good chance to review those.
Thank you, Kent, and thank you again for the diocese for the invitation. I wanted to share my email address in the chat and extend to you an invitation for anyone who's interested. I'll be teaching a course on this topic next spring on Wednesday afternoons at the School of Theology called Hello Church. And we can get into these themes a bit more, both theologically and practically. So it'll be more on the theology of communication, but also on things like how do we handle conflict and power dynamics and difficult conversations? How do we handle public communications and media relations? Anything across the gamut that deals with communication and ministry, we'll be offering a course on that. So if this sounds like something that you're interested in and you're thinking of maybe professional development, you could certainly come and take that course with us a la carte. So if you're interested in that, I wanted to put up my email address, and you could follow up with me and I'll direct you to the right persons. But I'd warmly invite any of you who are intrigued by this to come and spend the semester with me thinking about it a bit further. So thank you for the chance to say that. I didn't want to take over the event for a plug for the program here, but we do have that available for anyone who's seeking into that.
Well, and I just wanted to also mention that we do have scholarship funds available through the CEM scholarship, that if you wanted to reach out to one of us at Catholic Education Ministries, we could certainly help you to get some scholarship funds to be able to participate in that. So we encourage that as well. And we will do our closing prayer. O God of infinite goodness, in your great name, we have gathered as members of the body of Christ. We give you thanks for the gift of your Son, Jesus Christ, and the guidance of the Holy Spirit. You sent the word to change us so we might better live as your disciples. May we stand as a living witness to truth and freedom, to peace and justice, to mercy and compassion, so all people may be raised up to a new hope. You sent the Spirit to ignite in us a fire, so we might better serve those living on the margins. We ask this as one body, gathered, nourished, and sent in your love. Amen. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.